episode 100 of Sports Shorts. Big event. Peter is the chairman and CEO of Magis LLC, a sports marketing and management company, I believe, and he's also faculty advisor of the Harvard Law School Committee on Sports and Entertainment Law, professor at the Harvard Law School, a former college football player also, and our guest today. Welcome.
Thank you, Bobby. Great to be here.
So we always start off with a little background on our guest, led by our guest. So why don't you talk to us about what you're up to these days and the professional path you took to get there?
Yeah, thanks so much. It's an honor, and thank you for all of your years of service to SLA. I really appreciate all that you've done to advance learning in this area, Bobby. So kudos to you. And so I went to Jones Day out of Harvard Law. Why? Because they represented the then ownership groups of the Browns and the Cavs, and then an NHL team as well. And I made it my business to get involved on the sports law side. And then I worked my way over to IMG as my principal client at Jones Day, Cleveland. And after about 15 years at Jones Day, I went over to IMG to run their worldwide legal department, which I did for 11 years until we were sort of forced to sell the company. Mark McCormick, the founder, got sick, died, and we sold the company, and that propelled me into what I've been doing ever since, which is teaching at Harvard, running the sports law program there, offering 3 courses, and one huge module of which is Death of Amateurism, NCAA. And I also started up a program, which is a master's program down at the University of Miami, which I do in the spring. And I have my own private practice, as you said, within Magis, which is consulting, marketing, and investing, primarily in sports properties.
Well, let's just jump into it. We're part of a little group earlier this week having a conversation, and I really wanted to continue it. We all know that college sports is in a great state of flux. Where it goes, I don't think any of us know. And I think we just have to jump through all the preceding cases and start talking a little bit about House and the perspective of what we discussed the other day, which is the death of amateurism or not. Yeah. But I think, a lot of talk about the House settlement and the amount of money, but I think a lot of people aren't aware that there's basically 2 damage elements of this proposed settlement. So why don't you quickly give us a little sense of this 2-part so people really understand what House is about?
Sure. This is a tectonic plate shift. It grows out really of Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence in the Alston case, in which he said the NCAA is not above the law. And as we discussed, Bobby, I mean, they just keep taking it on the chin on antitrust grounds repeatedly. And the way it was 3 cases were consolidated, House, Hubbard, and Carter. And I have a little addendum, which I shared with our group the other night. But the short of it is it's a retro and a prospective. Okay, the retro is retro NIL as far back as the statute of limitations allows, not to get too lawyerly about it, but it's basically a 2.7.
Well, this is for lawyers, this program, so get as lawyerly as
All right. It's a $2.77 billion settlement proposed. NCAA pays 1.2. The conferences, the Power 5, now down to 4, pays 24% of that 2.77. It's over time, and over 10 years back pay. The remaining Power 5 conferences pay 10%, approximately $280 million. The FCS, Football Championship Subdivision, it pays $364, approximately 13%. And then Division I conferences that don't play football, like the Big East, they pay about 12%. They're going to pay in about 12.5 paid in. And most of it is going to be funded by the NCAA out of its March Madness money. So that's really all they have. That is their main resource, as we all know. And it'll be coming from the withholding of money that would otherwise have gone to these member institutions from future NCAA distributions. That will cover the retro part of it. And it'll be fixed. There's a chart that's attached to the settlement proposal it's fixed as to who will get how much. And I mean, it'll be a master class that'll be administered like the abandoned video game cases and so on and so forth. And it's proposed that the settlement recovery information for this retro class would primarily be replicate supposedly a broadcast NIL. That's the major component part. So football and men's basketball players would be able to submit a claim into the settlement fund, and the range is expected to be from 15 to 280,000, depending on your submission and your NIL. Basically, broadcast NIL. The next largest component part is again football, men's basketball. It's a video game claim, much like O'Bannon, and that'll range at a much lower level. But there are 18,000 unique athletes in this class that are expected to be able to submit in that next category. Lost opportunities, however that's defined, there's about 3,000 in that subclass under the House Hubbard Carter case. And then additional compensation is another one with 14,000 claimants available. And then women's basketball, you go way down on the retro. Their broadcast NIL is going to range from 3,000 to 52,000. And their lost opportunities range from like not much to at the very high end, a few 100,000. But it kind of breaks down the retro, and then the prospective is and you and I have talked about this going forward. Revenue share up to approximately 20 million, maybe call it 20 million rounded, which is meant to replicate on a going forward basis for 10 years. That which the media monies would have generated historically, and it'll be annually adjusted for inflation. So it'll go to 22, 24, however. I mean, this is your neck of the woods, not mine. But going forward, the permissive part of the 10-year plan would be, the Power Four conferences, the schools, the Davids and the Goliaths. The Davids are going to be out there spending to the max 22 million, and they're getting ready to spend it. The settlement will be approved finally or not. April 7th is the final hearing. There's a lot of objections to it. There's a lot of subclasses that are going to opt out, but that's the general framework. And you and I have talked about how this number was picked out of sort of thin air. This athletic directors kind of say, "Oh, that's kind of what we spend per year is about 22 million. So I guess that's what we're going to revenue share." So we'll see how it goes. There's a lot of lip between that slip and cup, as you and I both know, because there's a Fontenot subclass that's objecting. There's a Cornelio subclass that's objecting. There's a lot of opt-outs, and there's a lot of claims being made by subclasses that say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't even close to being enough, Bobby. Isn't even close to being enough. If we're having a true revenue share, it should be billions more, not just millions. And we'll see if she does the final approval, and then we'll see what happens to the subclasses, which are not insignificant numbers of members of the class can opt out and continue to pursue, as you know, their own opt-out class action.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have the three named plaintiffs in the consolidated cases, all of whom seem to object to the settlement.
Exactly.
Which is a fascinating thing, and it begs the question of, a lawyer's duty to his clients. So the lawyers representing the plaintiff class, we're begging the question now, were they conferring with their clients about this settlement?
I know.
That seems to be the mystery to me.
I couldn't agree more. Well, we skipped the important part as class counsel is seeking $484 million in fees and potentially adding another $200 million as the future revenue share kicks in. And Grant House and the others, if they get, at the max, they might get $70,000, $85,000, $100,000. But the other part of this is because the ADs can spend whatever they want, however they want to spend it, a swimmer or an Olympic sport team member, they're going to cut those rosters and there'll be fewer. Grant House was recently quoted as saying, nobody asked me to approve this. There was a big article saying, hey, I'm Grant House. Hey, wait a minute. They're going to cut my sport. There are going to be far fewer swimmers, getting any of this revenue share. And that stinks. And as you know, there's trade associations and unionization discussions to try to level the playing field. But yeah, I mean, it's wacky. It's really wacky.
Yeah, one of the things about the in the course of the case with Judge Wilkin, who she seems to be the lucky one that gets all these cases. It's the
Yeah.
most interesting version of forum shopping. It's like when they used to go to Judge Doty in the NFL,
Yes.
go to Minnesota only. Now they're only going to Judge Wilkin.
Yes.
Um, but one of her objections was she wanted uh, a better definitions between boosters and legitimate business entities.
Yes.
And they came back a few weeks later, Kessler and company, the plaintiff's attorneys, and they had then proposed uh, a response which still seems awfully fuzzy to me. And it further begs the question: who's paying? If it's not that prospective 2022, whatever it did, in some way, which we don't know,
Right.
but it's opening up for third parties, which are individual companies and conceivably could be collectives who don't seem constrained in this settlement by anything. Is that fair?
Well, they came back on September 26, 2024 with their revised settlement. She had said, hey, you knuckleheads, you haven't defined what a collective is. Hey, you bird brain, Jeff, come on, give me what a booster is. If it, she said in the hearing, it just left way too much room for interpretation. It's going to get in the way of student athletes' current NIL deals. And they came back with these cumbersome definitions of associated entities, which I won't quote to you, but that was meant to cover, as you suggest, collectives, and then associated individuals, which is 7 single-spaced lines to define really what a booster is. And then the only guardrail that they proposed to put around it, which good luck policing it, is a designated enforcement agency to evaluate whether third-party NIL deals reflect fair market value and qualify as legitimate NIL arrangements. And college athletes are supposed to report every contract worth $600 or more to a new clearinghouse database. And if the deal is deemed to be pay-for-play inducement, it'll be denied or require amendments. So I guess you would say that's what they're trying to put the horse back in the barn. But the wild horse is raging. He's out there. And all the states are saying, no, you can't do that. We have laws that say you can't intrude on what our
Yeah,
particularized
and I
state.
think four
Yeah.
states have already filed
Yeah,
saying, this is in violation of our state law. And
exactly.
and my second question is this this oversight agency that they're
Oh,
talking about to review the deals.
yes.
That opens up a whole other can of antitrust issues,
Oh,
because if under Alston the NCAA can't establish a set of rules, how can, absent congressional antitrust exemptions, can you have a third party reviewing these?
absolutely. It's exactly. They're walking right back into Kavanaugh. Bobby, I agree. I mean, yeah, there's conflicting state laws. What part of you can't restrain trade did you not understand? Uh, you, you know, really, it's Senators Skinner, Bradford, Hunt, Nebraska, Oregon, California, an embargoed statement coordinated with National College Players Association saying you can't do this. It violates our statutes and imposes illegal restrictions on NIL from boosters and collectives. So we met the enemy, and it's us. It's the boosters and the collective still.
So when we get through all of the legal nuances, which we've just briefly touched upon, and the concerns around, I'm a pathological optimist, but I don't see how this gets approved on April 7th.
I,
There's too much chatter surrounding it, and for argument's sake, she says, I can't approve this settlement. It needs to be clear. It goes back to the drawing board. But there are so many layers of objections. And
yeah,
then you have the whole issue of, as you've pointed out, you have the subclasses that
right,
are opting out as classes, and undoubtedly you're going to have individuals opting out.
right.
This litigation is not going to stop. I mean, if people think April 7th is the end date, I can't even imagine that happening. This thing will spin out for a long time, and along the way, these subclasses, these that are being created and filing their own actions, are going to raise issues that may not have been raised before Judge Wilkin. And the question is, are all these cases going to end up in her court? Are some going to end up in other districts? I mean, we don't know yet, but it seems likely that there's going to be other forums involved. And I doubt that they're going to say, oh, just send everything to Judge Wilkin. I mean, it could happen, but I doubt it.
Well, Jeff, has been quoted as saying, "Oh yeah, that's what's going to happen." But Fon now is the one that Garrett Brosius, he doesn't fool around. I mean, he's the one who represented minor league players in their Fair Labor Standards Act case very successfully. He also helped to unionize minor league baseball players. He's a former minor league baseball player himself. But Font now is the one I think you need to keep your eye on, because that goes back to August of 2024, and they tried to move it right from. It's also coupled with Cornelio. They're the ones that are saying it's short by about $1 billion, and a fair revenue share. Would require maybe way much more than is currently being proposed, and they're still out there in a different federal court in Colorado, Bobby. So it remains to be seen. Yeah, and I raised the larger question when I was just teaching this recently. By putting the cap, so you're head of SLA, Gabe Feldman probably has answered this for you already, but isn't putting the cap of 22 million price fixing in and of itself?
Again, I mean, this is like the legal issue onion.
Yes.
You look at this case, and every time you peel something back, you get to something else. We discussed the other day about, the athletes themselves, and
Right.
given what General Counsel Abruzzo at the NLRB has said about
Right.
these are employees. So now we get into this whole discussion of organized trade association. What happens to these student athletes? Are they being told you don't have the right to organize? Are they going to be employees? These sort of extend everything out. And in the Fontenot case, where they're saying the settlement is not the right amount of money, to me it's mind-boggling that all of that settlement money is based upon the media rights deals.
Right.
And if you look at the total value of the media rights deals, and you were to interview any executive at any network that ever did a TV deal and said to them, how much did you value the use of the name, image, and rights?
Right.
They would, to a person, tell you, we never even considered it. It was
Right.
never part of a discussion.
Right.
When you have a rep and warranty from a conference or the NCAA or whomever, organization like that says, you have the right to use the
Right.
players for purposes of promoting blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And now first it changed with O'Bannon,
Right.
players that were no longer actively playing. You had to control use of that and clear those rights. But now we're in a whole different world. So you've got a situation where the economists come up with these numbers for value that, as I said to you the other day, you're not making an apples to apples comparison. If you're looking at professional athletes who have collectively bargained for certain
Right.
rights and obligations, and you're dealing with student athletes who have no ability to even organize, maybe they do. Maybe we'll see some group try to organize and follow through, unlike we've had in the couple of
Yeah.
instances, really. But until then, how can a group, when you're still subject to antitrust regulations, bargain as a group?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. And as we said, like the way the unions, the MLBPA, the NFLPA, all the major unions, as soon as you form a union, the league is protected by the non-statutory labor exemption. You can, an NFL player can't sue the NFL because his union has agreed to his mandatory terms and conditions of employment. So I would say to athletes.org or some of these associations that are trying to organize, don't unionize, don't make them employees. God knows what that would mean from a tax standpoint for them, for the schools, everything else. Make yourself a trade association, because then you still have standing to bring an antitrust claim for the next and the next restraint and the next restraint. So I think it's a very they need more representation, but probably I wouldn't recommend going to all the way to a union status. As much as I love unions generally, but I mean that the Freeman McNeil end run, that famous case that Kessler worked on many years ago with Jim Quinn, it only worked because they decertified, and then they had standing to sue as free agents. And that standing still exists for all the collegiate athletes. So I'd hold on to that. That's pretty strong leverage.
So while we could talk about the nuts and bolts of the House cases and talk about these issues that are rising out of it, I think it's let's get out of the forest and look at a few
Yeah,
trees for
yeah,
a moment.
yeah,
And that is the subject of amateurism and how it survives, and does it survive, and what does it really mean for college sports? I don't think
yeah.
any of us know, but you don't have to be a learned gypsy to look at the tea leaves and have a sense that things are not going in a very positive direction for what are called the non-revenue sports.
Oh gosh, I really fear for the Olympic sports. I mean, right? I mean, as I said, you can spend the money however you want. So they're gonna, if you're smart, you're gonna spend 90% of it on not the Olympic sports. And then what? Have they go to club status? I mean, what happens to the swim team, the track team, the fencing team, all those things? Yeah, I mean, as you said about your rugby group, you're going to have friends of Cal Rugby come together and endow the sport to keep it at varsity level. I mean, I think that's prescient that you were able to do that. But I think otherwise, it's the haves and the have-nots. It's either those, it's put up or shut up time. It's either you come up with your 20-25 million a year somehow, some way, and maybe a private equity involved to help you pay it off. But if you're not in the game to buy Bryce Underwood to Michigan for 10 million or maybe 12 million
Maybe
dollars,
12.
maybe 12, and Debanza at BYU, maybe 5 to 7 is the over under millions he's being paid to play 1 year at BYU. I mean, the inmates, being the boosters, not student athletes, are still or Carson Beck, like we talked about. So, I mean, Forest for Trees, Carson Beck's smartest movie ever made. I'm sure they paid. They paid Cam Ward well over $1 million to go down there. I'm sure they paid, whatever the rumor is. It's more than that to go down to Miami to replace Cam Ward. Notre Dame go buy another quarterback. They kind of have one growing up, number 18. Maybe he'll finally surface. Ohio State will just go buy another quarterback. Their second string guy went into the portal. I mean, it's inmates running the asylum. Bobby, I think is terrible way to
Well,
describe it. The inmates are the boosters, not the players.
so here's one of the big issues is that for people that don't understand, the class in the House cases is scholarship athletes in
Right.
football, in the Power Five conferences, men's and women's basketball. They get to share in the wealth. So if I was NC2A champion baseball player, I'm not included in that class. If I was, a 5-time swimming NCAA champion and went on to the Olympics, I'm not part of the class. I don't get to share in it. So I'm being told, okay, well, the House case says, oh, well, we've got this prospectively, whatever the number is, 20 million, 25
Right.
million, whatever the number is going to be, gets distributed. But how is it distributed?
Yeah.
And
I
is it
mean,
is it limited to distribution among the class members? Is it distribution to all student athletes? And then, as if this isn't problematic enough, 53 years almost after the fact, Title IX comes walking into the
I
room.
know. I know.
And the Title IX implications are going to be bigger. And that's would seem to me, just as a simple TV lawyer that I am, that that's going to open up a whole other storm of litigation.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. I have to correct one statement that we made the other, and I apologize for not catching it, but there is this small sliver in these consolidated classes called the additional settlement sports class. Additional, like, and they get like, so I just correct the record. There is a little bit of money being thrown at additional sports. I mean, like pennies on the dollar. The average submission by anybody outside of the two classes you defined is estimated to be $300. So there's $300 waiting for you if you want to take Joel Smith. So there's that. But what's more important is the Title IX equivalency. I mean, how do you substantially proportionally spend this $20 million on your men's and women's teams? Does that mean all the lawsuits that came out of, oh, we're going to cut women's varsity this? You can't. You have to cut an equal number of men's, programs. A bunch of schools got caught up in lawsuits there. So you tell me what happens. But the answer that's come back from what I have heard is athletic directors who now all of whom are hiring general managers to manage the salary cap, as we talked about. I mean, believe it or not, they're saying, well, because 90% of our money is media money for men's football, basketball, we're going to spend 90% on men and stop me. Catch me if you can. I think that's what they're going to do. And the other sports, there'll be very little scholarship money left, revenue share money left, and they'll cut the rosters down on swimmers like Grant House.
Yeah, well, I think the big issue becomes, a lot of universities, as part of sort of that classical 19th century
Yeah,
idea of interdisciplinary education and having all these sports and make it all part of your university experience. And there's a lot of universities that have, 25, 30 varsity sports.
right.
And looking at public universities where you have a situation where funding from the state has been declining year after year after year after year, what happens to varsity sports outside of the three named
Right,
in-house?
right,
What is the future there? And if you can't support those as varsity sports and you call them club sports, who's supporting them as a
right,
club sport? Again, it's probably the alums, but the bigger issue is, particularly for Americans, which is, I think, why we're so unique in the sporting world, is that our Olympic sports training ground has historically been universities.
I know, I know.
And if you lose that pathway, what does that do to the Olympic movement in the United States?
I know. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. Um, so Harvard, just to pick them, they have 42 varsity sports right now, right? And permissively, they could spend 20 million. They're not going to going forward. They're just not. But if you took Harvard alums in the last Olympics, they would have been like the fifth largest country that medaled. You know what I'm saying? In fencing, in all the sports nobody pays any attention to. Well, actually, Gabby Thomas, she's smart. So I just use that as an example. What happens to those people? And then on the flip side, at a place like Harvard, Tommy Amakert's trying to build, a really strong team, and his two best players, one went to Stanford for deep six figures, one went to Duke for deep six figures, or no, Georgetown. Best tennis player at Harvard went to Duke for it reported to be deep six figures. So it is this haves and have-nots thing, I think, and to say, oh, now XYZ sport is going to be a club sport unless you can endow it like you did with your rugby team at Cal. I think they're going the way that of the dodo bird. I, I
And
hate to
look,
say
it's
it.
really sad. And what's more interesting to me is we now have level. It's clearly haves and have-nots.
Yes,
The power conferences are the haves,
right,
and then you have sort of the sub-haves, which are private universities with gigantic endowments, which
right.
you got to ask: are they going to cut loose some of those dollars to save athletics?
No,
I wouldn't be so sure about that.
no.
And so then what happens? If you're a club sport, let's for a second shift for a moment to look at the education part of the student athlete,
Right.
which, as I said the other day, seems to be given very short shrift. But if you eliminate my varsity program, does that mean I can't? There are no more no longer athletic scholarships for a club sport?
Right.
Probably
Right.
so. So
Right.
now you're taking the biggest class of student athletes and telling them there's no more scholarships for you,
Right. Right.
which
I,
to me is the single most criminal unintended consequence of House.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've heard ADs, I want to quote them saying, we're going to spend the money whence it came. And that means men's, and a little bit basketball, football, a little bit women's basketball. That's about it. And they're not shy about it. And like we talked about, I mean, the CFP, it was so interesting when they presented the trophy. There was no mention. There was no mention of the NCAA because it has nothing to do with the CFP. And you know better than anybody with the media rights for the CFP. Notre Dame's got its own multi-gazillion dollar deal over here. They don't need a conference. But I guess what I'm getting at is who needs the NCAA anymore anyway? Because they can't patrol the territory and enforce basically anything. So what does that lead to? A 2.0, like you were saying, where you have to show enrollment and a 2.0, and then you can play for Georgia. And that's Georgia LLC 2.0 or something like that. Is that what we're looking at?
Oh, I mean, I think we're looking at, again, without my crystal ball nearby, I would still suggest that I wouldn't be surprised if, most of these TV deals are got, many years to go, the big money
Yeah,
deals on the conferences. But there's going to be a lot of changes, and the leagues themselves, the conferences, are the SEC and the Big Ten,
right,
neither of whom are, they're giant conferences now. Are they going to form a super league? Are
right.
we going to end up with a super league just for football? Are we
Yeah,
going to have a separate super league just for basketball? What happens to all of these other programs? Where do they go? And there are actually, which doesn't get enough press to my mind's eye, there are a lot of student athletes who have the opportunity to get college educations because of scholarships.
yeah, yeah.
And you lose those, what happens to that class of people? That's the unintended consequence of House that I
Right.
think people got to pay some more attention to, because you're going to screw people out of their education who are there not for the chance to get to the NFL, not for the chance to get the NBA, but for the chance to get a quality education at no
Right.
cost.
Right. That is Grant House's point. Exactly. My swim team is going away, right? And he's the named plaintiff, and for sure. I mean, Ray Anderson used to run that program. He's no longer there, but sure. An EAD is going to sit back and say, well, which sports can I cut on scholarships so I can max out on? Hire a 34-year-old coach at Arizona State and get into the playoffs. That's a pretty good deal. I'm going to spend more there because that's where the money is. And all of a sudden, Grant House is unrepresented, as we said at the beginning, meaningfully not represented. And all the swimmers not going to have any scholarships left over for the swimmers. It's crazy.
Well, I think, we're looking at a world where if this settlement gets approved, for that class of athletes in that 5-year window will collect some money.
Yes.
There are those who will opt out, won't collect, may collect more, may not collect, who knows. You'll have a lot of athletes, student athletes, who will suddenly no longer have a scholarship,
Right.
and we end up with potentially a well-paid minor league of football and basketball players who are waiting the next step, who are clearly professionals. And once you deem them a professional sport, how you keep the NLRB from knocking at the door, I have no idea.
I couldn't agree more. We even talked the other day about Super League being funded by private equity, right? I mean, remember when JP Morgan tried to take over the Premier League? But it's effectively happening. I mean, more and more Premier League teams in soccer, football are being purchased by the equivalent of private money, equity money, or Saudi money, or whatever money. And I think we could be looking at a promotion relegation model. I mean, with the top pick a number 40 football teams, the top pick a number 30 basketball teams that are willing to go for broke and spend, assume this gets approved, the 20 to 22 million. Like I said the other night, Rick Pitino, he'll get the Saints. You get Luke Carnesecca out there and St. John's and raise enough money to make St. John's relevant again. You know what I mean? It's crazy, but I think that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, I look, people, we all know that getting Congress to act on current issues is always a problem, one they rarely get to.
Yeah.
And now we have a situation where without, to my mind's eye, some sort of federal legislation, a lot of this House proposal, as we just discussed a few minutes ago, falls to a third party agency to review, but absent an antitrust exemption, they can't.
Right.
So what is this? What's the enforcement model of this settlement? And other than the attorney's fees that will flow to the plaintiff's lawyers,
Yes.
what happens? What happens when you say, okay, this is the case, this is approved,
Right.
but now we're going to monitor it?
Oh, good luck with
You
that.
can't. There's no grounds for a monitoring agency that's not subject to antitrust scrutiny.
Well, exactly. And my history with IMG, all those years, and now WME, any agent worth his salt or her salt is going to be able, in the blink of an eye, to say, "Hey, this social media influencer, Riley Leonard, is worth every penny of the $1 million that he's being paid." That's what agents do. Proof of performance. We'll prove it. Take us to the clearinghouse. We welcome it. Look at the return on investment that Riley Leonard, the brands that posted with Riley Leonard. Look at the return on the investment with him taking that team all the way to the finals. He was probably undervalued at whatever they paid him.
Well, I mean, it's guys like we talked about this the other day. It's the ethos of college sports was always watching the development of players,
Right.
watching the guy rise up and finally get his chance. National championship game recently played. You have two quarterbacks that spent 1 year each at the school.
Right.
So it's almost as if, if you're a fifth year senior or could be a sixth or seventh year senior, you're going to make a lot of money by entering the portal and going to another school. So, again, will there be amateurism? Probably. Will it be funded? Unlikely, unless it's funded by alumni sources, because the return from private equity in the Olympic sports, I don't see as really being there.
Right.
So you're going to have to find it another way. And does it survive? And even though largely the Ted Stevens Act and amateurism is really nonsense, because all these athletes are making money from their sponsors anyway and still being deemed eligible for the Olympics. But in the truest sense of the word, I fear for the continued model of sports in American universities.
I do too, except I'll tell you this. I'm based out of Cleveland. I mean, honest to gosh, the celebration from that natty, as they're now calling it, from winning that natty, I mean, you would have think everybody in Ohio won the daggone lottery. I mean, people are dancing, and people are still dancing in the streets, scarlet and red, all throughout Ohio. And don't you think Alabama's watching that, grinding their teeth? And Brian Kelly at LSU was for sure grinding his teeth. Notre Dame went so far, and here comes Georgia, and here comes Texas with Arch Manning. I mean, people become so blind to are they student athletes or not, because I just want my team to win the natty. That's what I want,
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Arch Manning, backup redshirt freshman quarterback, $5 or $6 million he made this year.
Yeah, easy money. Yeah, because he's got the right lineage. Yeah.
Well, look, Peter, I'm not going to keep you any longer.
Not at all.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And for those of you out there in SLA land, your membership, it's an annual membership. Your membership, if you haven't renewed, ended December 31st. So please go to sportslaw.org, renew your membership, or if you're not a member already, join, and then join us in Nashville in May for our annual conference, which is going to be good, looking back on 50 years of what we've done. And there'll be some more discussion about the House case, especially
Yeah,
with that April 7th date coming up. So, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
my
And
pleasure. I mean, thanks
catch
for
up
all
with
you
you
do for
soon.
SLA. It's a great organization, and I just renewed again, so I'm with you all the way.
Thanks so much.
All right, have a good one.